Before there were maps, before there were names, before anyone could stand beneath the sky and wonder what it meant, the planet was already alive with motion. Forests stretched without edges, breathing in slow cycles of light and shadow. Rivers wandered across continents with patient certainty, cutting valleys that would remain long after memory existed to describe them. Mountains rose, fractured, and softened again under wind that carried no language. Nothing paused to be observed. Nothing needed to be remembered. The air held no trace of smoke from distant cities. No roads divided the grasslands. No boundaries marked ownership. Herds of strange mammals moved across open plains, heavy and unafraid, guided by instincts honed over millions of seasons. In the shallows of warm seas, ancient creatures drifted through clear water, while above them, clouds gathered and dissolved without witness. The sky did not belong to anyone. The ground did not wait for footsteps. Ice sheets advanced like silent kingdoms, covering entire regions beneath vast white stillness. Then, over spans longer than imagination can comfortably hold, they withdrew. Oceans swelled and claimed coastlines, then retreated again, exposing fresh land to sun and rain. The planet shifted as naturally as breath. Species emerged, flourished, and vanished. Some ruled for ages beyond counting. Others flickered briefly and disappeared without leaving more than a faint impression in stone. There was no sense of anticipation in any of it. The Earth was not preparing for something greater. It was not building toward a final act. It simply continued, adjusting to internal rhythms and distant cosmic influences. Stars burned steadily overhead, indifferent to what unfolded below. The continents drifted, colliding and separating, in a choreography that required no audience. It is tempting to imagine that all of this motion was leading somewhere, that the forests and oceans were rehearsals for a more important presence. Yet nothing in the landscape suggests expectation. The balance between predator and prey held without guidance. Ecosystems stabilized, collapsed, reformed. Life experimented in endless variations, testing forms that seemed improbable, beautiful, even terrifying. Many succeeded for a time. None endured forever. In this immense span of time, the idea of yours does not yet exist. There are no stories being told beside firelight, no hands pressing pigment against cave walls, no questions about origin or destiny. The world functions without reflection. Survival requires no philosophy. Growth needs no narrative. The planet turns in silence. And then, almost too small to notice, a subtle change appears along the margins of this ancient stage. In scattered regions, upright figures move hesitantly across uneven ground. They are not rulers of the land. They are not, even, particularly remarkable. Vulnerable to cold, to predators, to hunger, they survive by caution and cooperation. Their presence alters nothing at first. The rivers continue their courses. The herds migrate as they always have. From a great height, these early hominins are barely distinguishable from the countless creatures that came before them. The earth does not shift in response. The sky does not darken. The forests do not bow. Yet something fragile has entered the frame. Beings capable, one day, of wondering whether the world was ever complete without them. Long before cities carved their shapes into the land, the planet carried more than one kind of human. Across cold valleys and forested hills, along coastlines and wide grasslands, different branches of the same ancient family walked upright beneath the same sky. They were not shadows waiting to fade. They were living, adapting beings, each shaped by climates that tested them in distinct ways. In the north, Neanderthals moved through winter landscapes with quiet endurance. Their bodies were compact and strong, built for cold that would have crushed lesser forms. They shaped stone with care, mastered fire, and tended to one another when injury struck. Beneath overhanging rock, they sheltered from wind that howled across frozen plains. They buried their dead. They survived, not by accident, but by skill. Farther east, in forests thick with shifting light, Denisovans carved out their own existence. We know them only through fragments, teeth, bone, faint genetic echoes. Yet their presence once stretched across vast territories. In humid valleys, children traced patterns in soil, while elders shaped tools from stone and wood. They understood the rhythms of their terrain, adjusting as seasons turned. Across warmer regions, Homo erectus endured longer than many realize. For nearly 2 million years, they traveled widely, adapting to diverse environments. Their footprints mark riverbanks long eroded. Their campsites once flickered with controlled flame. They were explorers, steady and persistent. For a long time, these groups overlapped. The planet did not belong to one lineage. It was shared. Encounters must have occurred, moments of tension, curiosity, exchange. The silence of the archaeological record leaves space for imagination. Fires burning in the distance, figures glimpsed through trees, awareness that others walked the same ground. What science now reveals deepens the mystery. Within the genetic code of modern populations lie small fragments of these relatives. Traces of Neanderthal resilience linger in immune systems. Echoes of Denisovan adaptation assist survival at high altitudes. They did not vanish into emptiness. They merged, partially absorbed into a lineage that would continue. Extinction, then, was not always a sudden disappearance. It was a thinning, a blending, a gradual narrowing of diversity, until only one branch remained clearly visible. The idea of as grows uncertain here. We are not a solitary triumph. We are a mosaic built from encounters, alliances, and quiet integrations. And yet, despite this blending, something ended. Neanderthals no longer move through snowbound valleys. Denisovans no longer leave marks in forest soil. Homo erectus no longer watches herds from sunlit ridges. Their stories concluded while one lineage persisted. They were intelligent. They were capable. They adapted for hundreds of thousands of years. So why did only one remain? Climate shifts offer part of the answer. Rapid cold phases, unstable resources. Competition may have intensified. Small differences in communication or cooperation could have tipped a fragile balance. Perhaps survival favored flexibility at scale. Perhaps chance played a larger role than any trait. The truth is quieter and more unsettling. Evolution does not guarantee fairness. It selects under pressure, sometimes for reasons invisible in hindsight. The surviving branch was not necessarily superior in every way, only positioned at a critical moment to endure. As the number of human lineages narrowed, attention turns to the group that remained. Something within them shifted subtly. A capacity expanded. A threshold approached. To understand why only one survived, we must look not only at those who disappeared, but at what changed inside the fragile few who continued forward. The Earth did not grow calmer for our ancestors. If anything, it became more uncertain. Climate patterns lurched unpredictably. Ice advanced and retreated in uneven pulses. Droughts pressed against fertile land. In some regions, volcanic winters darkened skies and lowered temperatures for years at a time. Human populations were small, scattered, and fragile. A single prolonged famine could thin entire groups beyond recovery. It would have been easy for Homo sapiens to disappear as others had. And yet, within this pressure, something subtle unfolded. Not a change in bone density or muscle strength, not a dramatic physical mutation. The shift was quieter, almost invisible at first. Along coastlines and riverbanks, shells were gathered not only for food but for ornament. Pigments were carried across distances. In caves far from daylight, hands pressed red ochre against stone, leaving silhouettes that endured. Imagine the moment, a figure seated near firelight, grinding mineral into powder, mixing it with water or fat. Outside, wind moves across cold terrain. Survival is never guaranteed. Inside, against bare rock, a hand spreads wide, pigment blown across skin and stone. When the hand pulls away, its outline remains. That image lasts longer than empires, longer than languages not yet spoken. It is not necessary for hunting. It does not make shelter stronger. It serves something else. Burials deepen this mystery. Bodies placed carefully into the earth. Objects arranged beside them. Care given to those who will no longer rise. These acts suggest imagination stretching beyond the immediate present. Memory becomes ritual. Ritual becomes meaning. Language grows layered. Sounds evolve into symbols capable of carrying not only instructions, but stories. With stories comes coordination beyond direct sight. A tale, shared beside fire, binds individuals who were strangers hours before. A shared myth unites those separated by distance. Cooperation expands beyond bloodline. This may have been the quiet revolution. Strength alone cannot organize hundreds into a coordinated whole. Claws and teeth do not build alliances across valleys, but shared narratives do. A belief in common ancestry, a trust in unseen forces, a vision of collective future. These ideas allow strangers to move together, to share resources, to defend territory with purpose greater than instinct. Perhaps this was the turning point. Not sharper tools, not taller stature, but the ability to imagine together. And still, vulnerability remained. Human numbers were dangerously low. Genetic studies suggest that at certain moments, our lineage narrowed to a few thousand individuals. A disease, a catastrophic eruption, a prolonged freeze could have erased the entire experiment. That possibility lingers over every painted wall and buried grave. The handprint in the cave did not know it would survive. The storyteller by the fire did not know their words would echo through millennia. Each gesture balanced on uncertainty. Yet imagination carried resilience within it. It allowed flexible alliances. It created adaptive networks. It extended identity beyond immediate kin, strengthening bonds across fragile landscapes. With minds expanding and belief structures forming, these small groups no longer remained confined to familiar ground. Stories travelled ahead of footsteps. Trust expanded across wider territories. Slowly, cautiously, they began moving outward, toward lands their ancestors had never seen, carrying not just tools, but ideas. They did not leave with a grand announcement. There was no moment when someone stood at the edge of Africa and declared an age of exploration. Small bands moved because they always had, following herds, tracing river valleys, drifting toward coastlines where food was reliable and seasons were gentler. The decision to step beyond familiar territory was likely ordinary. A shoreline continued farther than expected. A grassland opened into another. Movement was survival, not destiny. The planet they entered was immense. Northern regions lay beneath massive ice sheets that glimmered under pale light. Winds swept across exposed land bridges during colder phases, briefly connecting continents that would later separate again beneath rising seas. Giant mammals roamed freely. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, enormous deer whose antlers stretched wide as branches. Humans were not dominant among them. They were cautious participants in ecosystems that had functioned long before their arrival. The journey unfolded in fragments. Parents carried children across tidal flats during low water, timing crossings with tides. They observed, but did not measure. Hunters paused along frozen ridges, scanning horizons where herds moved like shifting shadows. Campsites flickered for a season, then vanished without trace. Each group knew only the next stretch of land, not the arc of continents ahead. Genetic evidence, uncovered thousands of years later, would tell a quieter story beneath these movements. At several points, populations narrowed to astonishingly small numbers. A harsh winter, a failed migration, a sudden drought could shrink a lineage to the brink. The human experiment hovered close to extinction more than once. The path forward was never guaranteed. And yet, step by step, coast by coast, sapiens spread. Not because they were stronger than the animals they encountered. Not because they were immune to cold or hunger. Their bodies were vulnerable, their numbers were thin. But they adapted quickly. They learned new food sources. They altered tools to match unfamiliar terrain. They communicated plans, coordinated hunts, and adjusted routes when conditions shifted. Their advantage was subtle. Cooperation extended beyond immediate family. Knowledge traveled through conversation, passing from elder to child, from one band to another. When climates changed, strategies changed with them. Flexibility became protection. Over generations, this mobility reshaped perception. The horizon was no longer a barrier, but an invitation. Deserts were crossed during rare wet cycles. Forest corridors opened during warmer phases. Ice receded just enough to reveal new passages northward. No one saw the whole map, yet together their footsteps traced ones. The world, once boundless, began to feel navigable. Continents were not conquered. They were entered, slowly, carefully. Humanity remained fragile, always one harsh season away from loss. But fragility did not prevent expansion. It may have fueled it. How did a species that nearly disappeared come to stand on distant shores, facing oceans beyond imagination? The answer was not force, But adaptation layered upon adaptation, conversation layered upon memory. As these groups settled new territories, their presence altered landscapes in ways too subtle to notice at first. Fires burned in unfamiliar valleys. Hunting patterns shifted delicate balances. The expansion had begun, and the planet would never be quite the same. The world they entered was enormous. Mammoths moved in slow, deliberate herds across tundra that seemed endless. Giant ground sloths tore leaves from trees with heavy patience. In Australia, massive marsupials wandered beneath open sky. These creatures had ruled their environments for thousands of years. They feared little. Nothing had challenged them in ways they could not withstand. Then humans arrived. Not in overwhelming numbers, not with armies. Just scattered bands establishing quiet footholds along rivers, coasts, and valleys. At first, their presence appeared insignificant. The great animals continued their migrations. The seasons turned as they always had. Yet small shifts began to accumulate. Hunting techniques evolved. Cooperation allowed groups to target prey, larger than any individual could confront alone. Stone points grew sharper. Strategies grew more refined. Fires were set not only for warmth, but to shape landscapes, driving animals into open ground and encouraging the growth of preferred plants. Grasslands expanded where forests once stood. Patterns adjusted. Climate, too, was shifting. The Ice Age loosened its grip in pulses. Temperatures rose unevenly. Habitats transformed quickly, pressing species already adapted to colder conditions into narrower territories. Rivers changed course. Vegetation zones migrated northward. Stress layered upon stress. The timelines overlap in ways that raise quiet questions. In region after region, the arrival of humans and the disappearance of megafauna occur within similar windows of time. Not perfectly aligned, not universally synchronized, but close enough to unsettle certainty. Were warming temperatures alone responsible? Did habitat disruption tip balances already strained? Or did coordinated hunting, even by small groups, accelerate decline beyond recovery? There is no single accusation carved into stone. The evidence suggests convergence rather than blame. Ecosystems under pressure become fragile. Introduce a new predator capable of planning, communicating, and adapting, and outcomes change. What feels most striking is scale. Humanity remained vulnerable during this era. Populations were still small. Climate swings threatened survival. And yet, even at this fragile stage, our species exerted influence beyond its size. The removal of large herbivores altered vegetation patterns. Predators dependent on them declined. Landscapes transformed gradually, then irreversibly. Shift was not deliberate conquest. There was no global awareness, no intention to reshape continents. It was survival practiced with growing intelligence. But intelligence magnified impact. The planet still felt wild. Vast stretches of land remained untouched, yet something had changed. A species capable of altering ecological balance had begun to spread. The transformation was slow, almost invisible in a single generation. Over centuries, it became undeniable. Did our ancestors understand the ripple effect of each successful hunt? Did they notice that certain animals grew rarer with each passing season? Perhaps change unfolded too gradually to trigger alarm. The horizon always promised new ground, new herds, new opportunities. Tension rests beneath this realization. Humanity was both fragile and formidable, subject to climate swings, yet already capable of reshaping ecosystems. Influence did not require industry or cities. It required coordination and memory. As large prey diminished and climate stabilized into warmer phases, a new question quietly emerged. If the great roaming herds were no longer reliable, how would survival adjust next? The answer would transform not only landscapes, but the very rhythm of human life. The ice loosened its hold gradually. Glaciers retreated northward, leaving behind valleys rich with meltwater. Rivers swelled into fertile plains. Seasons steadied into patterns that could be observed, remembered, and quietly trusted. The world felt less volatile than it had for thousands of years. Stability, even if temporary, opened space for experimentation. The shift did not begin with grand design. It likely started with noticing certain grasses grew thicker, where seeds had fallen near camps. Discarded grains sprouted close to hearths. Some plants, tended unintentionally, returned the next season in greater numbers. Hands that once gathered began to replant, not as a declaration of a new way of life, but as insurance against uncertainty. Seasonal camps lingered longer, shelters grew sturdier. Storage pits appeared, lined carefully to protect dried grain from moisture and pests. Clay vessels hardened in fire, capable of holding surplus. The rhythm of movement slowed. Yet farming was not immediate liberation. Diet narrowed around cultivated crops. Bones found in early settlements reveal signs of strain, spines compressed from repetitive labor, teeth worn by coarse grains. Work intensified. Fields required clearing, planting, guarding. Harvest demanded coordination and timing. And still, population increased. Stored food buffered against lean years. Infant survival improved. Groups expanded beyond what roaming alone could sustain. With more people came new complexity. Decisions carried wider consequences. Who controlled stored grain? Who decided when to plant, when to defend, when to share? Villages formed not overnight, but layer by layer. Semi-permanent dwellings clustered together. Paths hardened under repeated use. Boundaries emerged subtly at first. This field, but grazing area. Land, once passed through freely, became tied to identity. Ownership entered human vocabulary long before it was written. Hierarchy followed close behind. Some individuals organized irrigation. Others mediated disputes. Certain families accumulated surplus beyond immediate need. Leadership shifted from temporary hunting guidance to sustained authority over resources. Humanity traded mobility for predictability. The open horizon, once a constant companion, receded behind fences and marked fields. In return, there was steadiness, less wandering, more accumulation. It is often framed as progress, a step forward in an inevitable march. But from another angle, it was a gamble. Farming locked communities into specific locations. Crop failure now threatened not just a travelling band, but an entire settlement with stores invested in one place. Predictability came with dependency. What if planting seeds altered us more profoundly than mastering flame? Fire extended warmth and protection. Agriculture rewrote social structure itself. It anchored memory to land, reshaped diets, concentrated populations, and laid groundwork for systems far more complex than any nomadic group required. The transformation was quiet, yet irreversible. Once fields replaced grassland, once children grew up knowing the same walls and soil, there was no simple return to endless migration. Roots, both literal and symbolic, sank deep. From these clustered dwellings would rise something larger, coordinated labor beyond farming, shared rituals beyond survival. Structures built not just for shelter, but for meaning. The seeds of permanence had taken hold, and with them began the slow construction of societies powerful enough to define history itself. Dawn settles gently over clustered dwellings of mud and stone. Thin threads of smoke rise into cool air, drifting above roofs pressed close together. Beyond the huts, fields stretch in careful rows, their fragile order drawn from once wild ground. For the first time in the long human story, families wake where they slept the season before. The horizon no longer shifts with each migration. The earth beneath their feet feels familiar. Inside these early settlements, routine shapes the day. Grain is ground between stones, the rhythm steady and patient. Walls are patched with fresh clay after seasonal rains. Clay vessels are inspected, filled, sealed again against the months ahead. Children move between doorways that do not disappear with the next storm. Elders sit where sunlight enters at predictable angles. The future is imagined not in distant valleys, but in the soil just beyond the village edge. Something subtle changes within the mind when movement slows. The land is no longer a temporary path. It becomes personal. This field feeds us. That well belongs to our families. Boundaries form quietly, not yet drawn on maps, but understood through memory and habit. The word ours gathers weight. With storage comes surplus. With surplus comes difference. One household's harvest thrives while another's falters. Clay jars fill unevenly. Small imbalances grow. Exchange begins within the village, as much as beyond it. Authority starts to settle around those who manage grain, water, timing. Time itself feels altered. Without constant migration, years accumulate in layers. New walls rise atop old foundations. Footpaths deepen into permanent tracks. The village remembers each season physically, its layout shaped by repetition. Permanence reshapes memory. Stories are no longer carried alone in spoken words beside travelling fires. They anchor to place. A tree becomes the site of an agreement. A clearing marks where ancestors gathered. Burial grounds emerge at the edges of settlements, the dead interred close to the living. Bones return to the same soil that feeds the crops. Identity begins to root downward. Children grow up knowing not only their kin, but their land. They recognize boundaries without being told. They inherit fields rather than roots. Belonging shifts from movement to territory. Yet beneath this stability rests vulnerability. A failed harvest cannot be avoided by packing up and moving on. Drought lingers directly over planted ground. Disease travels swiftly through tightly clustered homes. Predictability becomes dependence. The same walls that offer shelter also confine risk. What happens when a wandering species decides to stay? Security appears, but so does tension. Cooperation deepens, yet competition sharpens. Hierarchies harden slowly, almost invisibly. Disputes over water or grain carry heavier consequences than arguments on open plains ever did. Still, the villages endure. Their memory thickens with each passing generation. Ritual spaces emerge where gatherings once occurred. Stone markers rise to honor those buried nearby. Ancestry ties directly to geography. The story of a people becomes inseparable from the ground beneath them. As settlements grow and routines settle into tradition, belief stretches wider. Shared rituals unify households. Symbols rise from necessity into meaning. What began as survival in clustered dwellings begins to resemble something larger than community, a framework capable of shaping not only memory but power itself. Long before metal tools rang against stone, before kings carved their names into history, massive rocks were lifted toward the sky. Circles of standing pillars rose from open fields. Platforms were built high above river valleys. Stones too heavy for one person, even 10 people, were dragged across uneven ground by coordinated hands. The effort was immense. The result did not produce food. It did not offer shelter from rain. So why did they do it? At dawn, groups gathered from surrounding settlements. Families walked for miles, carrying tools carved from bone and stone. Ropes were twisted from plant fibers. Wood rollers were positioned carefully. Voices called out in rhythm. Muscles strained together. The stone shifted, inch by inch, until it stood upright, defying gravity and common sense. It is easy to assume survival always comes first. Yet here stands evidence of something deeper. These structures demanded labor that could have been spent hunting or tending crops. They required coordination beyond immediate family units. They required time. Perhaps survival was not enough. In these early ceremonial sites, belief organized what hunger never could. Shared symbols brought scattered communities into alignment. A standing stone could serve as a meeting place for seasonal gatherings. A raised platform could mark celestial patterns, turning sky into calendar. Rituals performed in these spaces bonded strangers across distance. Cooperation expanded beyond necessity into meaning. The paradox deepens. In some regions, monumental building appears alongside early farming, not clearly before or after, but intertwined. In others, ceremonial sites may have drawn people together before fields were fully cultivated. The possibility unsettles conventional timelines. What if large-scale cooperation did not grow out of cities, but helped create them? Faith structures could have been magnets. Seasonal gatherings might have required sustained food supplies. To support ritual centers, cultivation intensified. Agriculture and ceremony braided together, reinforcing one another. It is a quiet but profound shift, imagination shaping settlement, not just responding to it. Stone marks the first attempt to make ideas permanent. A story told beside fire fades. A pillar carved into earth remains. Meaning becomes architectural. The invisible gains weight, with hundreds assembling for construction. new roles emerge. Some coordinate lifting. Others track seasonal cycles, guiding ceremonies. Planning becomes essential. Schedules matter. Authority, at first temporary, begins to solidify. Leadership grows not from brute force alone, but from managing shared belief. Did belief build the first civilizations before governments ever existed? The stones suggest a yes, whispered across millennia. They imply that unity around symbols may have preceded walls and written law. Ritual could have been the framework upon which administration later settled. As gatherings swell and traditions stabilize, complexity increases. Who decides when to build? Who controls access to sacred spaces? Who interprets the signs carved into stone? Coordination requires structure. Structure invites hierarchy. The fields beyond the monuments continue to feed villages. But at the center stands something different, a place where collective imagination shapes Earth itself. These stones are not practical in the simplest sense. They are declarations that humans can organize around the unseen. And as more people gather around these sacred centers, as rituals repeat and structures multiply, governance begins quietly forming in their shadow. Rules solidify. Responsibilities divide. The line between spiritual authority and administrative control grows thinner, preparing the way for something even larger than community. Water does not follow intention. It follows gravity. It floods when unchecked and disappears when neglected. As settlements expanded along fertile rivers, controlling water became the difference between abundance and ruin. Simple channels turned into complex irrigation networks, stretching across fields. Canals required maintenance. Schedules determined when gates opened and closed. One family could not manage this alone. Coordination widened. At first, leaders likely emerged as practical organizers. Someone who understood the river's moods directed the flow. Someone who kept track of stored grain advised when to release it during lean months. Authority did not necessarily arrive with force. It arrived with responsibility. Yet responsibility gathers influence. As villages merged into early city, states' organization required new tools. Clay tablets appeared, pressed with small wedge-shaped marks. What began as symbols in ritual spaces shifted into something more exact. Grain deliveries were recorded. Labor hours counted. Trade exchanges tracked carefully. Symbols no longer carried only myth. They carried obligation. Writing did not appear as poetry first. It appeared as accounting. With records came expectations. With expectations came enforcement. Storehouses grew larger. Walls began rising around clusters of dwellings, not only to protect against outsiders, but to define who was inside. Defensive needs justified armed groups. Armed groups required loyalty. Civilization was not born in a flash of genius. It assembled itself, piece by piece, from necessity. Irrigation demanded schedules. Storage demanded oversight. Trade demanded agreements. Defense demanded coordination. None of these innovations were inherently oppressive. They solved immediate problems. But once systems formed, they acquired permanence. Taxes supported public works. Armies guarded territory and expanded it. Laws were carved into stone slabs and displayed for all to see. Rules that began as guidelines hardened into commands. The language of cooperation shifted toward the language of control. When did coordination become authority? When did authority become hierarchy? As cities grew denser, differences widened. Those who managed resources accumulated power. Those who recorded transactions controlled information. The structure of governance shaped not only land use, but thought itself. Identity attached to citizenship. Obedience intertwined with survival. The transformation is subtle when viewed step by step. A canal cleared, a record kept, a wall built, a guard appointed. But across generations, these steps formed architecture, far more complex than any stone circle. Humanity had not only anchored itself to land, it had engineered systems to regulate behavior. The open plains of deep time now feel distant. Instead of scattered camps, there are organized grids of streets. Instead of temporary alliances, there are institutional loyalties. The environment responds to human planning. Fields irrigated, roads laid, boundaries fortified. Yet this control flows both ways. Systems designed for stability begin shaping those within them. Roles become inherited. Expectations narrow, individual line with structured routines, dictated by centralized authority. Humanity has learned to shape the land with canals and walls. Now it begins shaping other humans through law, hierarchy, and obligation. The first city-states stand as proof that cooperation can scale beyond imagination, and that scaling changes the nature of cooperation itself. From these early centers of power, something larger will rise. Networks will stretch beyond rivers. Armies will cross continents. Ambition will expand outward, transforming not just regions, but entire civilizations, in ways the first organizers could never have foreseen. The view rises above the river valley and settles over a city, unlike anything that came before it. Walls encircle dense clusters of homes. Streets branch outward in deliberate patterns. At the center, a structure towers above the rest, a step temple reaching toward the sky, layered in stone and sun-baked brick. From a distance, it appears permanent, immovable, as if it had always been there. Population gathers within these walls. Voices overlap in markets, heavy with traded goods, grain from distant plains, timber from far hills, metals drawn from deep earth. Trade routes stretch outward like veins, carrying wealth and information across regions that once felt isolated. Caravans cross deserts, guided by shared maps of memory and trust. Writing expands beyond accounting. Laws are inscribed in public spaces. Stories are recorded on tablets and scrolls. Myths evolve into literature. Authority is no longer spoken alone. It is carved, stamped, sealed. Inscriptions proclaim divine favor. Leaders describe themselves not merely as rulers, but as chosen stewards of cosmic order. Innovation compounds upon itself. Engineering advances allow taller structures. Administrative systems manage expanding populations. Taxation funds ambitious projects. Armies guard borders and push them outward. Empires form not only by force, but by economic gravity, drawing neighboring communities into orbit through trade and protection. From within these cities, the future feels secure. The walls are thick. The granaries are full. The temples rise higher with each generation. Architecture becomes a declaration of permanence. Monuments are constructed to defy time itself. Quietly, a pattern forms. Every empire believes it represents the final stage of development, that no greater structure will follow, that its laws are the most refined, that its reach will remain unmatched. This conviction is inscribed into stone, reinforced through ritual, echoed in proclamations. Yet, even as towers stretch upward, subtle cracks gather below, resource demands intensify. Forests are cleared to fuel kilns and smelters, irrigation expands fields, but strains river systems. Peripheral regions supply goods and labor, their resilience tested as extraction increases. Trade routes, once reliable, become vulnerable to disruption. Expansion requires constant maintenance. Environmental cycles do not pause for ambition. Drought returns to fertile plains. Flood patterns shift unpredictably. Soil, cultivated year after year, thins in strength. Population density magnifies vulnerability to disease. Growth, once energizing, becomes heavy. From the outside, the empire appears solid. From within, tensions accumulate slowly. Administrators adjust policies. Armies suppress unrest. Architects reinforce walls. Grandeur and fragility exist side by side. Why does every empire believe it will be the last? Perhaps because momentum feels like destiny when viewed from the center. Because innovation convinces its creators that history moves in one direction. Because monuments cast long shadows that suggest permanence, yet shadows shift with the sun. As empires expand outward, internal strain grows inward. Construction gives way to maintenance. Confidence begins to compete with caution. The focus subtly shifts from building higher to holding together what has already been built. The change rarely begins with fire. It begins with something smaller. A caravan that does not arrive. A harvest slightly weaker than the year before. A rumor spreading through crowded streets that a distant province has stopped sending tribute. From the center, these disruptions feel temporary. Systems built over generations appear strong enough to absorb them, but trade routes falter again. Political rivalries harden into factions. Decisions once made through consensus fracture under competing interests. In one region, Rains fail for a season. In another, floods arrive at the wrong time. Drowning fields not yet harvested. Grain stores deplete faster than expected. No single event announces collapse. Instead, strain accumulates quietly. Administrators issue new decrees. Taxes increase to compensate for shortages. Armies are redirected to suppress unrest, rather than defend borders. Peripheral territories sense weakness and pull away. What, once held together through momentum, begins to require constant force. Archaeological layers tell this story long after the voices fade. Thick deposits of ash suggest hurried abandonment. Storage jars remain half-filled, left behind as families flee. Streets once worn smooth by traffic gather dust. Over time, vegetation returns, threading its way through cracked foundations. Roofs fall inward. Walls lean, then crumble. Writing systems disappear for generations. Tablets cease to be pressed. Records end mid-sentence. Languages once spoken across regions shrink into isolated dialects. The memory of grandeur compresses into legend. It is tempting to search for a single cause, an invading army, a catastrophic drought, a violent uprising. Yet collapse often arises from convergence rather than singularity. Climate shifts, economic imbalance, political fragmentation, environmental depletion, they overlap, amplifying one another. The twist is unsettling in its simplicity. Collapse is not an exception within history, it is part of the rhythm. Complex systems, by their very nature, accumulate fragility. The more interconnected they become, the more vulnerable they are to cascading failure. The story of humanity is not a steady ascent toward stability. It is cyclical compression followed by reinvention. Cities expand. They strain. They contract. Knowledge concentrates. It fragments. Structures rise and fall, then rise again in altered forms. And yet, collapse rarely means extinction. Survivors adapt. They migrate. They carry fragments of memory techniques, stories, rituals into new landscapes. Skills once used for irrigation might be repurposed for smaller communities. Myths shift shape but retain familiar cores. Trade networks shrink but do not disappear entirely. From ruins, new patterns emerge. If civilizations fall repeatedly, why do we assume ours is different? Perhaps because each era feels uniquely advanced. Each society believes it has solved the vulnerabilities of those before it. Confidence masks repetition, but the soil holds records of many cities once thought permanent. As fallen empires dissolve into fragments, space opens for transformation. Vacant territories invite new alliances. Broken trade routes are redrawn. Religious and cultural ideas evolve, reshaped by necessity. From the compression of collapse, fresh configurations begin forming, quietly, steadily, reshaping belief, trade, and identity once more. When cities fall, their stones do not speak. Walls crumble quietly. Libraries burn or decay. Palaces collapse into layered sediment. What remains is rarely the full story. It is the version that endured fire, flood, conquest, and neglect. Survival becomes the editor of memory. Victors carve their interpretations into monuments. They define battles as triumphs. They frame enemies as villains. They describe themselves as destined. Nuance fades beneath proclamation. Over generations, simplified stories replace tangled realities. Legends smooth the rough edges of doubt. Myth grows where detail dissolves. Consider how much depends on writing. Entire systems of knowledge vanish when scripts disappear. Technologies once understood become mysterious relics. Trade routes once thriving turn into faint lines archaeologists trace centuries later. If no one copies a text, it vanishes. If no one remembers how a device worked, it becomes an enigma. Collective memory is more fragile than stone. Fragments survive unevenly. A clay tablet remains because it was fired accidentally in a blaze. A carved pillar persists because it was too heavy to dismantle. Oral histories shift across retellings until original context blurs. The modern world builds its understanding on these uneven remnants, interpreting shards as if they were whole. This is the quiet reveal. What we know about the ancient world is shaped less by what once mattered most and more by what happened to survive. Influence is not always preserved. Advancement is not always documented. Entire traditions may have flourished briefly, leaving only faint impressions in soil. Ruins stand as silhouettes against the sky, but they do not explain themselves. Archaeologists brush away dust carefully, reconstructing sequences from pottery layers and architectural patterns. Scholars compare inscriptions across regions, filling gaps with careful inference. Interpretation becomes necessity, and interpretation carries uncertainty. How much of the ancient world have we never truly seen? How many innovations disappeared without trace, because no durable record kept them alive? How many ideas were overshadowed by the narratives of those who prevailed? History, often presented as continuous progress, the silence between events invites speculation. Some theories reach too far, others remain cautious. Yet beneath both lies the same truth. Memory is curated by circumstance. Survival shapes narrative. This does not render history unreliable. It renders it incomplete. The awareness itself changes perspective. We move through modern cities assuming continuity with those that came before, yet so many chapters remain buried beneath layers of sediment and sea. Coastlines shifted after the Ice Age. Settlements now rest underwater. Forests grew over forgotten roads. Each transformation edited what could be remembered. The fragility of memory mirrors the fragility of civilizations themselves. As empires rise and fall, as systems expand and contract, stories compress or fragment, and from those fragments, new identities form, with memory continuously rewritten and survival selecting which stories endure. Humanity approaches another threshold. The patterns of rise and collapse, preservation and loss, set the stage for a transformation that will once again redefine what it means to be fully human. The expansion of power did not rely only on armies. It moved along quieter paths. Across deserts, caravans advanced in slow lines, carrying goods packed carefully in woven sacks. Along coastlines, ships followed currents known through generations of observation. Markets filled with voices from distant regions, accents blending beneath open canopies. Objects passed from hand to hand, silk smooth against calloused fingers, spices releasing unfamiliar scents, metal tools balanced with quiet admiration. Trade routes stretched like veins between distant cities. What began as exchange of materials gradually became exchange of thought. A technique refined in one valley arrived months later in another. New alloys were tested after travelers described furnaces they had seen abroad. Calendars adjusted as astronomers compared observations under different skies. Knowledge moved with merchants, sailors, pilgrims. Ideas did not require conquest to travel. They rode alongside commerce. Mathematics crossed borders, inscribed on clay tablets, and later on parchment. Concepts of zero, place value, geometry, each evolved through conversation between cultures rather than within sealed isolation. Navigation improved as coastal knowledge merged with inland mapping. Healing practices adapted when herbs from one landscape entered another. Civilizations often imagine themselves as singular creators of their achievements. Monumental architecture, legal systems, artistic styles, each credited to internal brilliance. Yet contact reveals a more layered story. Techniques borrowed quietly from neighbors, methods refined through adaptation, symbols reshaped when absorbed into new belief systems. Progress rarely emerges from a single center. It accumulates through exchange. As roots expanded, the world did not shrink physically. Mountains remained high. Oceans remained vast. But intellectually, distances narrowed. A discovery in one region no longer remained confined for centuries. It moved outward, sometimes slowly, sometimes with surprising speed. This exchange reshaped perception. Cultural boundaries softened in places, while hardening in others. Shared goods fostered trust. Shared knowledge fostered competition. Awareness of distant powers altered political strategies. Alliances formed along trade corridors. Wealth clustered where routes intersected. Interconnection carried risk. Diseases traveled invisibly along the same paths as silk and metal. Crops, transplanted to new regions, disrupted ecosystems. Economic reliance on distant markets created vulnerability when routes were blocked. Political tensions intensified where trade wealth accumulated unevenly. Influence became entangled. No civilization stood entirely alone. Scripts borrowed characters. Beliefs absorbed elements from older traditions. Technological leaps depended on materials sourced thousands of miles away. Cultural purity dissolved under close inspection. What appeared distinct often contained threads woven from elsewhere. Empires expanded through military strength, but they endured through exchange. Shared ideas stabilized rule more effectively than swords alone. What if the greatest empires were built not by conquest, but by connection? Not by dominance, but by integration of knowledge gathered across borders. The answer lies in the artifacts themselves. A coin bearing foreign script. A temple design reflecting distant geometry. A legal code echoing older traditions. Each object whispers of contact. As information circulates more freely, curiosity deepens. Exposure to unfamiliar systems invites comparison. Comparison inspires questioning. Borrowing leads to refinement. And within this widening network of exchange, another transformation begins, one not rooted in trade alone, but in the structured pursuit of understanding. Curiosity, once scattered and informal, prepares to become formalized inquiry. The room is dim, lit by wavering candlelight. Shadows tremble across wooden tables covered in parchment and scattered instruments. Outside, the city rests in familiar rhythms, but inside these quiet chambers something begins to change. A scholar traces the arc of a planet against inked stars. Another dissects a preserved specimen, studying the fragile architecture of muscle and bone. Questions gather where once there were only inherited answers. For generations, knowledge traveled by memory, by repetition, by reverence. Texts were copied slowly by hand, guarded in monasteries, palaces, and courts. But with new methods of printing, information begins to multiply. Ideas that once required months of travel to encounter now appear in stacks of pages, replicated in astonishing numbers. Books pass from one hand to another, seeding discussion far beyond a single city. The shift is gradual, almost imperceptible at first. Thinkers begin testing long-held assumptions. Instead of accepting celestial movements as divine mystery alone, they chart positions and compare measurements. Instead of attributing illness solely to unseen forces, physicians examine patterns, experiment with treatments, record outcomes. Observation becomes method. In different regions, fragments of a new discipline take shape. Careful documentation replaces unquestioned tradition. Hypotheses form, experiments follow. Patterns are compared across distances, as printed manuscripts connect scholars who will never meet face to face. The structure of the cosmos is reconsidered. Ancient models of stars fixed upon crystalline spheres give way to theories suggesting motion and rotation. The Earth itself is reimagined, not necessarily as the center, but as one body among many. The suggestion unsettles more than astronomy. It challenges certainty itself. This is the quiet twist. Knowledge, when examined rather than inherited, destabilizes authority. Institutions built upon sacred narratives feel threatened when individuals ask for demonstration rather than declaration. Curiosity begins to move from admiration to scrutiny. Reverence shares space with investigation. The human body, once surrounded by superstition and taboo, becomes a subject of systematic study. Surgeons observe circulation. Anatomists map organs. Errors in ancient texts are corrected by direct examination. Discovery is rarely dramatic. It is cumulative. Each observation rests upon another, building momentum through patience rather than spectacle. Yet inquiry does not arrive without tension. Those who question accepted truths encounter resistance. Established hierarchies, whether religious or political, interpret scrutiny as challenge. The act of measuring becomes political. The act of writing new interpretations can provoke exile or worse. What happens when humanity begins to question the stories it once believed without doubt? Stability wavers. Some cling tighter to tradition. Others lean into uncertainty, drawn by the promise of clarity through evidence. The emotional rhythm remains contemplative. Inquiry grows through repetition. Observe, record, refine. Printing amplifies this exchange. Ideas circulate faster than censorship can contain them. Gradually, the world shifts, not in an explosion of light, but in quiet adjustments of perspective. The sky appears larger, the body appears more complex, the earth appears less central, and as structured investigation strengthens, its influence extends beyond workshops and observatories. Applied understanding begins altering crafts, medicine, navigation, and industry. Curiosity, once confined to scholars, prepares to reshape daily life in ways that cannot be reversed. Water once guided fields through simple channels. Now it turns wheels of wood and iron along riverbanks. Mechanisms spin steadily, converting current into motion. Grain mills hum with constant rhythm. Workshops fill with the metallic scent of heat and oil. Human muscle is no longer the primary source of force. Something else has joined the story. Eerily engines hiss to life in dimly lit rooms. Pistons move with measured insistence. Steam gathers beneath pressure, harnessed and directed. What began as curiosity inside observatories now expands into machinery capable of multiplying effort beyond natural strength. Production accelerates. Tasks once requiring days are completed in hours. The landscape changes accordingly. Workshops expand into factories. Windows darken under soot. Chimneys pierce the skyline, releasing smoke that drifts above growing cities. Urban populations swell as rural labor shifts inward. Streets crowd with movement at all hours. Work no longer follows the arc of the sun alone. Time itself transforms. Clocks regulate shifts. Minutes matter in ways they never did before. Seasonal rhythms give way to continuous cycles of production. The steady hum of machines replaces the quieter pulse of field and forest. Labor becomes synchronized, not to daylight, but to mechanical motion. Roads give way to rails that stretch across nations. Goods travel faster than ever imagined. Medicines develop with new precision. Materials once rare become common. Lives extend. Yet beneath this acceleration lies another shift. Less visible, more enduring. Resources buried underground for millions of years are drawn upward and burned. Carbon once locked in ancient forests enters the atmosphere as invisible accumulation. The exchange feels harmless in a single breath. In aggregate, it alters balance. Technological growth expands human capability while narrowing natural limits. Rivers are redirected permanently. Forests fall to clear space for industry. Habitats fragment. The scale of alteration outruns ecosystems' ability to recover fully. Humanity no longer merely adjusts to environment. It modifies environment in return. The threshold is subtle but profound. For thousands of years, adaptation meant responding to climate shifts. Now, climate begins responding to human activity. The direction of influence changes. This transformation is not purely destructive, nor purely triumphant. Progress brings mobility, connection, protection from famine. It fosters communication across continents. It deepens scientific understanding. But it also introduces dependency on complex systems that require constant input. Cities rely on distant fuel. Food chains stretch across vast supply networks. Comfort intertwines with vulnerability. What happens when our inventions begin transforming the very world that shaped us? The question does not demand immediate alarm. It invites reflection. The mechanisms that raised living standards also reshape atmosphere and ocean. The same engines that light cities alter skies. Standing at this juncture, humanity has crossed into a new phase. The planet is no longer only backdrop. It becomes participant in a dialogue, shaped by extraction and innovation. The machines continue turning, accelerating change beyond previous centuries. With each rotation of wheel and piston, humanity steps deeper into an era where its influence no longer fits within local boundaries. It spreads outward, accumulating quietly, preparing to make its presence felt on a planetary scale. From above, the lines begin to appear. Railways cut across continents like dark threads, stitched through Earth. Steamships trace steady paths across oceans that once divided civilizations. Telegraph lines stretch pole to pole, carrying pulses of coded thought faster than wind or horse ever could. What were once isolated regions now hum within a single, widening network. Mines reached downward into mountains, hollowing stone that had rested undisturbed for ages. The land bends to ambition. Colonization advances alongside industry. Territories are mapped, claimed, partitioned. Resources travel thousands of miles to feed growing markets. Wealth concentrates where lines intersect. Population expands at a pace unseen in earlier centuries. Villages transform into metropolises within a single lifetime. What once happened locally now ripples globally. A factory decision in one city affects forests in another hemisphere. A new demand for fuel reshapes landscapes far beyond sight. Telegraph messages coordinate supply and strategy in near real time. Distance loses power over consequence. Wildlife retreats as habitats shrink. Rivers are dammed and redirected. Soil is cultivated intensively. The rhythm of seasonal adaptation gives way to continuous output. Expansion feels unstoppable. Triumph and consequence intertwine almost seamlessly. Improved medicine reduces mortality. Infrastructure connects families across oceans. Knowledge spreads rapidly. Yet with each bridge built and each mile of rail laid, ecosystems shift. The scale of alteration exceeds anything previously known. The change accumulates quietly at first. Layers of sediment begin recording traces of human presence. Particles of ash, chemical residues, fragments of manufactured materials. In glaciers and ocean beds, future scientists will read these layers as signals of a new epoch. The planet, indifferent yet responsive, begins archiving human activity in stone and atmosphere. At what point does a species become powerful enough to reshape the planet itself? The transformation does not arrive with a single event. It emerges through repetition. Forest, cleared after forest. Mine after mine. Railway after railway. With each decision, carbon concentrations rise steadily, invisible but measurable. Air, once clear over growing cities, thickens. Oceans absorb change in ways difficult to perceive day by day. Feedback loops form slowly, like tension accumulating beneath a surface that appears stable. The scale shift is profound. Humanity transitions from participant within ecosystems to active modifier of global systems. Weather patterns, biodiversity, and atmospheric chemistry reflect collective choices. Yet from within expanding cities, progress feels undeniable. Mobility increases. Comfort grows. Communication accelerates. The story is not simple destruction, nor simple triumph. It is complexity, magnified. As influence spreads outward across continents and oceans, another transformation begins, less visible, but equally significant. With networks connecting minds as well as markets, the human psyche adapts to speed, scale, and constant information. The next shift will not occur only in forests and factories, but within thought itself. When machines began shaping landscapes, they also began shaping perception. Artificial light stretched the day beyond sunset. Streets glowed. Long after darkness settled, factories operated through night hours once reserved for rest. Later, electric bulbs multiplied across cities, softening the boundary between day and night until time itself felt negotiable. The sky no longer dictated rhythm. Clocks and switches did. Information accelerated. A message that once required months to cross oceans could now arrive in minutes. Then, seconds. Newspapers printed global events with unsettling immediacy. Voices traveled through wires, then through invisible signals, collapsing distance between continents. The world grew smaller, not only in trade, but in awareness. Urban life intensified this shift. In crowded districts, millions lived layered above one another, rarely touching soil. Food arrived in markets, disconnected from fields. Water flowed through pipes with no visible source. Seasons changed beyond glass windows, yet daily routine continued without interruption. For the first time in history, vast populations lived largely detached from direct engagement with land cycles. The human mind adjusted. Attention fractured as stimuli multiplied. Sounds, signals, advertisements. Headlines competed for awareness. Traditions that once passed slowly through generations encountered constant comparison with alternatives. Identity loosened from birthplace and occupation becoming shaped by exposure to distant cultures and shifting social structures. Yet, fluidity carried tension. With expanded freedom came uncertainty. Choices multiplied. Beliefs encountered challenge at accelerating speed. Communities formed across vast distances, while neighbors living side by side sometimes felt estranged. Connectivity fostered unity in moments of shared purpose, yet also sharpened divisions when perspectives clashed. The adaptation was subtle but profound. Humanity mastered external systems, transport networks, energy grids, communication platforms, but internal equilibrium struggled to maintain the same pace. Comfort increased, yet anxiety rose alongside it. The mind, once calibrated for small groups and slower rhythms, navigated complexity beyond ancestral precedent. Has our inner world kept pace with the speed of our outer inventions? The question rests quietly beneath daily routine. Sleep patterns adjust under artificial illumination. Conversations span continents, while physical communities thin. Information floods awareness faster than reflection can process. Mental landscapes shift as surely as physical ones. Known of this unfolds as catastrophe. It unfolds as transformation. New forms of creativity emerge. Global empathy becomes possible in real time. Movements for change organize across borders with unprecedented speed. Yet, polarization intensifies as ideas circulate without pause. The planet is not the only environment undergoing alteration. Cognitive patterns evolve under constant stimulation. Traditions loosen their hold. Authority decentralizes. Identity becomes both more expansive and more contested. The pacing of change feels relentless, though it builds from countless incremental decisions. Each innovation alters habit. Each habit reshapes expectation. The internal adjustment mirrors the external. With minds and machines accelerating together, humanity stands again at a threshold reminiscent of earlier turning points. Just as imagination once allowed survival across harsh climates, awareness now confronts complexity on a global scale. The next question echoes backward through deep time. How will adaptation unfold this time? High above the turning Earth, small metallic objects circle in silent arcs. Satellites glide along invisible path, relaying signals across continents in fractions of a second. From orbit, borders dissolve into faint lines. Oceans reflect sunlight in vast unbroken sheets. At night, cities glow like constellations scattered across land. Beneath this orbital web, digital networks pulse constantly. Information travels without pause, binding remote villages to global markets, individual voices to collective audiences. Human presence extends beyond the atmosphere, even as activity below reshapes forests, rivers, and coastlines. It is difficult to hold both images at once. The fragile primate huddled against ice age winds, and the technological civilization orbiting its own planet. Within a geological blink, everything changed. The Earth once turned without witnesses. Forests expanded and receded without commentary. Oceans rose and fell without record. Now the atmosphere itself carries evidence of human industry. Climate patterns respond to emissions accumulated across centuries. Species vanish at accelerated rates, their absence tracing back to human expansion and consumption. Continents are connected not only by trade but by shared information streams. The scale of influence feels immense, yet the timeline remains startlingly brief. From the first tentative handprint in a cave to global communication networks, spans a sliver of planetary history. Traits that once ensured survival in small bands, imagination, cooperation, adaptability, have expanded outward until they operate on a planetary scale. Imagination once bound tribes. Now it binds nations through shared concepts of progress, risk, and possibility. Cooperation once organized hunting parties. Now it coordinates supply chains across oceans. Adaptation once meant adjusting to climate swings. Now it includes redesigning energy systems and rethinking resource use. Are we witnessing another evolutionary shift? One just as profound as the first spark of imagination. The transformation from not fully human to fully planetary force did not announce itself loudly. It accumulated gradually until it reached critical mass. At some point, humanity crossed a threshold where its influence could no longer be considered local or regional. This realization carries weight, but also wonder. Never before has a species shaped both surface and sky with such precision. Never before has awareness of planetary fragility been so widely accessible. The tone here is not alarm but suspension. It feels less like conclusion and more like pause. Humanity stands between patterns. It has followed for millennia and futures. It has only begun to imagine. The rise and fall of empires, the rewriting of memory, the spread of ideas, all lead to this moment where capacity exceeds precedent. The threshold is psychological as much as physical. Recognition of planetary scale forces reflection. Actions that once seemed distant reveal interconnected consequences. The narrative bends forward. The next chapter will look beyond the present tension, asking whether history suggests resilience, repetition, or a path not yet fully visible. The story remains unfinished, hovering at the edge of possibility. Night settles over a modern city, and from above it resembles a constellation pressed onto Earth. Highways glow in steady lines. Towers stand illuminated against the dark horizon. Neighborhoods form geometric grids stretching farther than the eye can follow. The scene feels permanent, engineered, stable. Then the image fades. Stone arches broken by time emerge from desert sand. Cracked columns lean under open sky. Once crowded streets lie silent beneath wind, blown dust. Different materials, different centuries, yet the outline is familiar. Rise, confidence, expansion, strain. Across history, civilizations gather resources and concentrate power. They extend trade routes, develop systems of administration, and weave complex networks of exchange. For a time, growth seems irreversible. Innovation reinforces success. Populations swell. Architecture grows ambitious. The center feels secure, but beneath that security, tension accumulates quietly. Environmental demands increase as cities consume more fuel and food. Peripheral regions feel extraction more sharply. Social differences widen between those who manage surplus and those who labor for it. Political factions compete for influence. None of these pressures appear catastrophic alone. Together, the more connected a system becomes, the more a disruption in one sector ripples outward. Trade interruption affects food supply. Drought stresses irrigation networks. Economic imbalance fuels unrest. Fragility hides scale. Ancient collapses often followed this rhythm, not sudden destruction, but compounding strain. Administrative systems stretched thin. Resource depletion outpacing replenishment. Trust eroding between institutions and citizens. Eventually, contraction replaced expansion. The pattern is not identical in every era. Geography shifts. Technology advances. Yet the structural arc repeats in recognizable form. Complexity generates capacity. Capacity generates reliance. Reliance introduces vulnerability. Are we living in a unique era, or repeating an ancient pattern in a new form? From within a thriving system, the possibility of decline feels distant. Confidence often grows strongest just before limits become visible. Inscriptions from past empires proclaimed eternal endurance. Modern skylines convey similar assurance through steel and glass. The aim here is not prediction, it is recognition. Modern society is not separate from history, it emerges from it. The same human tendencies that built irrigation networks and monumental cities still operate. The same trade-offs between growth and stability remain present. Though amplified by global scale, technology may buffer certain risks. Communication may respond faster to disruption. Yet, ecological limits still exist. Human psychology still shapes decision-making. Systems still require maintenance and trust. Beneath the surface of illuminated cities, familiar dynamics circulate. Prosperity coexists with inequality. Innovation accelerates while resources strain. Connectivity fosters resilience and susceptibility at once. Seen from above, present and past mirror one another more closely than expected. The materials differ. The pattern persists. If cycles repeat externally across centuries, a deeper question follows. Perhaps the rhythm is not only structural or environmental. If patterns echo across centuries, they may not begin in stone or steel. They may begin inside the skull. Long before cities rose, small groups gathered around firelight. Faces flickered in orange glow. Stories were told in low voices, binding listeners together through shared memory. Cooperation ensured survival. Trust determined whether a hunt succeeded or failed. Symbols, marks on stone, gestures, shared names, allowed coordination beyond immediate sight. These cognitive traits carried humanity forward. The ability to imagine futures not yet visible encouraged planning. The capacity to read emotions strengthened alliances. Language transformed individual insight into collective strategy. Over time, these skills scaled outward, supporting settlements, trade networks, and governments. Yet, every advantage carries a shadow. The instinct to protect one's group once ensured survival against predators and rival bands. In modern contexts, that same loyalty can harden into division. Narratives that once unified communities can polarize populations when scaled to millions. Fear, once useful in immediate danger, now activates in response to distant events transmitted through screens. The scene alternates between eras. An ancient circle of listeners leans toward a storyteller, describing unseen forces shaping the land. Centuries later, countless individuals sit alone in dark rooms illuminated by digital light, absorbing streams of information. The environments differ, but the emotional mechanisms feel familiar. Humans still crave belonging, still respond strongly to threat, still align with narratives that offer meaning. Innovation often outruns reflection. New tools reshape communication before minds adapt fully to their influence. The same imagination that built symbolic language also constructed vast digital platforms. The same desire for cohesion that once held villages together now organizes movements across continents. The twist lies in scale. Evolution shaped a brain optimized for survival in small, close-knit groups. It learned to process signals within tight circles, faces, voices, immediate territory. Modern systems demand comprehension of global supply chains, abstract financial markets, planetary climate data. The mental leap is immense. Did our ancient survival instincts accidentally build a world too large for them? The tension is not evidence of failure, it is evidence of acceleration. Biological adaptation unfolds across thousands of years. Cultural and technological change can reshape society within decades. The mismatch creates strain. Attention becomes fragmented under constant input. Social comparison extends beyond village boundaries to global audiences. Emotional responses designed for direct interaction trigger in response to distant headlines. Unity becomes possible across vast networks, yet polarization intensifies as well. The architecture of the human mind remains largely unchanged from ancestral conditions, even as its creations exceed original limits. This inherited wiring powered cooperation at scale, but it also amplifies division when narratives compete. Recognition of this tension invites reflection rather than panic. The traits that carried humanity from fragile bands to planetary influence are not flaws, they are powerful tools. But tools applied at new scales require adaptation. If cognition shaped civilization itself, then the next frontier may not involve expanding outward alone. It may involve refining the very mechanisms of thought and perception that built this interconnected world in the first place. For centuries, technology reshaped the world outside the human body. Engines amplified muscle. Circuits extended communication. Satellites expanded vision beyond atmosphere, but gradually, the direction of innovation shifted inward. In quiet laboratories, algorithms learn patterns from oceans of data, making predictions faster than any individual mind could manage. Artificial intelligence begins not merely assisting decisions, but generating insights. Writing text, composing images. What was once tool becomes collaborator. Lines blur. Elsewhere, genetic research peers into the code once assumed immutable. DNA, the silent script, written across billions of years, is examined with deliberate precision. Scientists explore ways to edit sequences, to remove inherited disease, to influence traits previously left to chance. In specialized clinics, Experiments probe the interface between neurons and machines, seeking to restore lost function, or perhaps enhance what was already there. Humanity is no longer only reshaping landscapes. It is examining its own blueprint. The reveal unfolds quietly. For the first time in evolutionary history, change is not entirely blind. Natural selection shaped Homo sapiens without foresight. Now, foresight enters the process. Decisions once left slow biological drift are considered under conscious design. The boundary between natural and artificial begins to soften. Memory can be stored in digital archives. External devices assist cognition. Machine learning mirrors certain patterns of thought. If knowledge resides in networks rather than solely in brains, where does identity begin and end? The tone remains contemplative. No declarations of inevitable destiny. Only questions that linger. If cognition expands through technology, does the self expand with it? If neural interfaces one day allow direct integration with information systems, does individuality remain intact or transform? When genetic conditions can be altered before birth, how do societies decide which traits to preserve or modify? These possibilities hover at the edge of current capability. Some are already present in limited forms. Others remain theoretical, yet the direction is unmistakable. Humanity is experimenting with its own architecture. What if the next stage of humanity is one we intentionally design? The implications extend beyond convenience or efficiency. Evolution has always operated through variation and selection, constrained by environment. Now environment includes laboratories and code. The pace of potential change accelerates again, but acceleration brings caution. Modifying complex systems carries unforeseen consequences. Biological networks evolve through intricate balance. Altering one thread may tug others unexpectedly. Ethical frameworks struggle to keep pace with technical power. The world before modern humans feels distant, almost mythic, a time when survival hinged on adaptation to forces beyond control. Today, control extends further than any earlier generation imagined. And yet, fragility persists. Technological capability does not eliminate vulnerability, it shifts its form. We stand at the edge of redesign, aware that intention now participates in evolution. Whether this leads to greater stability or deeper division remains uncertain. Before looking too far ahead, it becomes necessary to turn backward again, to examine just how delicate the current arrangement truly is, and how easily even advanced systems can falter. At street level, the world feels orderly. Lights turn on with a switch. Water flows when summoned. Markets restocked overnight appear effortless. Planes lift from runways at precise intervals. Screens glow with information delivered instantly. Stability seems ordinary. Yet beneath this surface lies a web few ever glimpse. Power grids stretch across regions, balancing supply and demand in real time. Electricity generated hundreds of miles away, pulses through substations, transformers, cables hidden beneath pavement and soil. A fluctuation measured in fractions can cascade across entire networks. Engineers monitor flows continuously, adjusting unseen dials to prevent imbalance. Data centers hum in remote landscapes, vast halls of servers blinking in synchronized rhythm. They store conversations, transactions, images, histories. Each message sent across continents passes through layers of hardware maintained by specialists few citizens ever encounter. Invisible threads bind billions of people in continuous exchange. Supply chains extend across oceans. Grain harvested in one hemisphere travels thousands of miles before reaching supermarket shelves in another. Components assembled in distant factories converge into single devices. Financial signals move in microseconds between global markets, influencing prices in ways too rapid for human reaction. The scale, daily life, rests on this coordination. Energy production must match consumption precisely. Transportation depends on synchronized logistics. Medical systems rely on shipments that cross borders without interruption. Small disruptions, an unexpected storm, a blocked canal, a cyber malfunction, can ripple outward quickly. What happens when a civilization becomes so interconnected that no part can fail alone? Earlier societies, when strained, could contract. Villages could retreat to subsistence levels. Trade might diminish without erasing daily survival entirely. Modern systems resist such simplification. Cities depend on constant inflow of resources. Hospitals rely on uninterrupted electricity and digital access. Communication platforms require continuous maintenance. Complexity offers efficiency, but it also narrows margins for error. The web humanity has woven around the planet is intricate and impressive. It demonstrates extraordinary coordination across cultures and continents. Yet, it is tightly stretched. Each node supports another. Redundancies exist, but they too depend on larger structures. The tone here is not alarm, but perspective. The systems are resilient precisely because they are managed carefully, but resilience requires constant oversight. Stability is not passive, it is actively maintained. From above, this global network resembles a luminous lattice encircling Earth. Cables lie beneath oceans. Satellites relay signals in silent loops. Energy plants pulse like steady hearts. The achievement is undeniable. And yet, awareness of scale invites humility. The more integrated the system becomes, the more shared its vulnerabilities. A breakdown in one region can influence conditions elsewhere. Decisions made in boardrooms or control centers reverberate across landscapes and livelihoods. If external systems depend on delicate balance, then the environment supporting them cannot remain neutral. As infrastructure extends further and extraction deepens, the planet itself becomes an active participant in this unfolding story. Glaciers that once stretched confidently across mountain ranges now pull back year by year, exposing dark stone beneath. Rivers fed by ancient ice swell differently than they did a century ago. Coastlines adjust in subtle increments. Storm systems gather strength over warmer waters, their paths bending in ways that meteorologists track with increasing precision. No single change declares itself as extraordinary in isolation. Climate has always shifted. Ice ages advanced and retreated. Long before human industry, deserts expanded and contracted across millennia. Forests migrated as temperatures rose and fell. The planet has never been static, but measurements reveal something distinct about the present moment. Geological records preserved in ice cores show atmospheric composition stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Sediment layers quietly archive chemical shifts in oceans. Tree rings and coral growth lines form natural chronologies. These records speak not in accusation, but in pattern. Carbon concentrations rise at a pace unmatched in previous epochs. Global temperatures trend upward with accelerating momentum. Glaciers that once receded gradually now thin rapidly within a single human lifetime. Extreme weather events cluster more densely across regions. The shift feels both ancient and immediate. Earth is not passive scenery. It responds to pressure. Feedback loops amplify change. Melting ice reduces reflectivity, absorbing more heat. Warmer oceans alter currents and weather systems. Permafrost releases gases long locked away. Each adjustment influences others in subtle chains. Human influence becomes inscribed into the geological record. Microplastics settle into ocean sediments. Industrial residues appear in ice layers. The atmosphere carries signatures of combustion measurable anywhere on the globe. Future geologists, if they study these strata, will find a clear boundary marking intensified transformation. And yet, continuity remains. The planet has absorbed dramatic upheavals before. Massive volcanic eruptions cooled temperatures abruptly. Asteroid impacts altered ecosystems globally. Life adapted, diversified, endured. The distinction lies in speed. Changes once unfolding over tens of thousands of years now occur within decades. Systems that evolved gradually must respond quickly. Species accustomed to slow migration face compressed timelines. Human infrastructure, built for stable conditions, confronts unpredictable extremes. Have we entered an era where Earth's response becomes the dominant force shaping us? The question does not demand certainty. It invites perspective. The same planet that nurtured human civilization now interacts with it in feedback. Heat influences agriculture. Sea level affects coastal city. Storm intensity challenges infrastructure, carefully engineered for past patterns. The audience can feel the continuity introduced at the very beginning of this journey, a restless Earth shifting across ages. But now another variable stands within the equation. Human activity amplifies cycles once governed solely by natural forces. The tone remains calm. There is no accusation in data, only observation. As environmental shifts intensify, humanity confronts decisions reminiscent of earlier thresholds, moments when adaptation determined survival. The difference lies in scale. The choices ahead will ripple across a planet, intricately connected, echoing through ecosystems and societies alike. History rarely announces its turning points. When early communities first planted seeds beside their dwellings, they could not see cities rising thousands of years later. When empires expanded their borders, they did not anticipate the silence that would one day settle over their ruins. When factories began releasing smoke into open sky, few imagined atmospheric chemistry shifting on a planetary scale. In hindsight, each transformation feels inevitable. In lived experience, it felt uncertain. Today carries a similar ambiguity. Technologies promise solutions once considered impossible. Renewable energy spreads across landscapes. Communication platforms connect movements across continents within hours. Data models simulate climate futures with growing accuracy. Medical innovations extend lifespans. Coordination on a global scale has never been more achievable. And yet, that same connectivity complicates agreement. Political divides span borders. Economic interests resist change. Information floods faster than consensus can form. The tools capable of stabilizing systems can also intensify polarization when misused. The present moment does not feel singularly heroic or doomed. It feels suspended. Humanity has navigated narrow passages before. There were times when volcanic eruptions darkened skies long enough to threaten survival. Ice ages constrained migration routes. Resource depletion compressed populations until reinvention became necessary. Collapse cycles fractured powerful societies, yet survivors adapted and restructured. Adaptation is woven into our lineage. Flexibility allowed early bands to leave familiar territory. Cooperation enabled monumental projects. Inquiry opened doors to science and medicine. Time and again, vulnerability pressed against ingenuity, and ingenuity responded. The difference now lies in scale. For the first time, survival decisions operate globally rather than locally. Earlier societies could fragment and reorganize regionally. Today's systems interlock across continents. Environmental change, economic instability, technological disruption, all ripple through a single interconnected web. Will this era be remembered as another reset, or as the moment we learn to stabilize ourselves? The answer cannot yet be written. It is being shaped in real time through policy, innovation, restraint, and imagination. The emotional tone rests between caution and possibility. There is vulnerability in acknowledging that systems can falter. There is hope in recognizing that awareness exists where it once did not. Humanity possesses knowledge of its own impact, something ancient civilizations could never fully grasp. The scene slows as if standing at a shoreline at dusk. Waves move steadily inward, then withdraw. The tide turns gradually, almost imperceptibly. The horizon remains open, neither threatening nor guaranteed. This is a narrow window, not necessarily of collapse, but of choice. The past offers precedent for resilience. The present demands coordination at an unprecedented scale. The story does not end here. It pauses. Beyond this stillness lies a question reaching further into the future. Does humanity move toward renewal, repetition, or transformation into something entirely unforeseen? The next chapter will step beyond uncertainty and begin tracing that unfolding trajectory. Morning arrives quietly over a city that has known both expansion and strain. The first light spreads across rooftops, where solar panels tilt toward the horizon, catching energy without flame. Wind turbines turn in the distance with steady, almost meditative rhythm. Traffic hums softly below, less frantic than before, as if the day itself is pausing to consider its direction. Inside laboratories and workshops, Conversations unfold, not about conquest or extraction, but restoration and redesign. Engineers refine storage systems for intermittent power. Farmers experiment with soil practices that rebuild rather than deplete. Rewilding efforts trace former migration routes, inviting ecosystems to recover where space allows. The tone is not triumphant. It is careful. Humanity has faced tightening limits before. The first farmers responded to diminishing game by cultivating plants. Early cities managed water through canals and scheduling. When disease threatened dense populations, medical inquiry followed. Adaptation has always been part of survival. Now, adaptation is informed by data unimaginable in earlier ages. Climate models map possible futures. Satellite imagery reveals deforestation in real time. Atmospheric chemistry is measured globally. For the first time, the species influencing planetary systems possesses tools to monitor those systems directly. Renewable energy grids replace combustion. Where possible, buildings are redesigned for efficiency. Agricultural methods diversify to restore biodiversity. International agreements attempt coordination beyond borders, though imperfectly. None of these efforts appear as sudden miracles. They resemble incremental adjustments, refinements layered atop existing structures. The reveal emerges without spectacle. The same traits that once propelled expansion, imagination, cooperation, abstraction, can be redirected towards stabilization. Ingenuity that built railways can build resilient infrastructure. Coordination that managed empires can manage shared resources. Abstraction that once drove financial systems can map ecological balance. What distinguishes this moment is foresight. Earlier civilizations often confronted collapse without full understanding of the feedback loops constraining them. Soil erosion advanced unnoticed until yields failed. Trade networks frayed without comprehensive awareness of interdependence. Today, cause and effect are more visible. Data reveals connections between emission and temperature, between land use and species decline. Awareness, however, does not guarantee action. Momentum resists reversal. Economies built upon extraction cannot shift overnight. Cultural habits formed over generations require time to adjust. Political divisions complicate coordination. Even when solutions are technically feasible, implementing them demands consensus rarely achieved easily. Yet the window for renewal remains open. What if this era is not the beginning of decline, but the start of conscious adaptation? The possibility rests not in optimism alone, but in precedent. Humanity has repeatedly altered its trajectory under pressure. The difference now lies in scale and comprehension. The sunrise over the city does not promise resolution. It offers potential. Panels continue absorbing light. Turbines rotate. Laboratories persist in quiet experimentation. Renewal is plausible. It is not inevitable. If one path leads towards stabilization through deliberate adjustment, another path remains equally plausible. A path familiar from deep history, where warning signs go unheeded and repetition unfolds once more. The light dims slightly, though the story does not turn to panic. It turns to memory. Across centuries, the pattern reappears with subtle variations. Expansion pushes borders outward until supply lines stretch thin. Wealth concentrates in centers, while peripheries strain. Environmental systems are drawn down faster than they recover. Rivalries harden into open conflict. The sequence does not unfold identically each time, yet the rhythm feels familiar. Overextension, inequality, depletion, division, modern, parallels, surface, quietly. Resource pressure intensifies as populations remain high. Geopolitical tensions sharpen around trade routes and energy supplies. Economic influence consolidates in concentrated networks. Social cohesion tests under rapid information exchange and political polarization. The twist is understated, but significant. Technological sophistication does not exempt societies from collapse dynamics. In certain ways, complexity accelerates vulnerability. Financial markets respond within seconds to rumor or shock. Misinformation travels instantly, shaping perception before verification. Trust, once eroded, is difficult to restore at scale. Interdependence magnifies disruption. A breakdown in one region affects supply chains globally. Digital networks amplify conflict alongside cooperation. Systems designed for efficiency sometimes lack redundancy when stress intensifies. The tone remains steady, reflective rather than dramatic. History does not repeat mechanically. It does not copy itself with perfect symmetry, but echoes are audible. Behavioral tendencies persist. Short-term gain often competes with long-term balance. Competition occasionally overrides coordination. Power resists surrender, even when adaptation demands flexibility. Have we learned enough from history to avoid becoming another chapter within it? The question carries weight, not inevitability. Collapse has never meant the extinction of humanity as a species. It has meant contraction, fragmentation, reorganization. After empires fell, smaller networks formed. After trade routes dissolved, local systems adapted. Reinvention followed compression, yet modern scale complicates that reassurance. Interconnection links outcomes more tightly than in earlier centuries. A fragmented world today would confront challenges amplified by technology and population density. Recognition becomes the central opportunity. Patterns are visible. Data is accessible. Warnings can be examined before thresholds are crossed. The difference between repetition and adjustment may rest in how early signals are interpreted. Choice remains present. The narrative darkens only enough to reveal contrast. Renewal is plausible. Repetition is possible, but not predetermined. Humanity stands informed by precedent, aware of structural tendencies that shaped earlier declines. Within this awareness lies a third path. Neither simple return nor unconscious repetition. It would require innovation not only in tools, but in governance, psychology, and collective identity. It would ask whether history must define the future, or whether consciousness can redirect it. Between renewal and repetition, something unfamiliar waits, an option not yet fully realized, shaped by decisions unfolding in the present. The camera lifts again, higher than cities, higher than weather systems, until Earth curves softly against blackness. Satellites drift in precise arcs, silent witnesses to the planet below. From this distance, borders vanish. Storms swirl without regard for language or law. Oceans reflect light as they have for millions of years. And yet, something is new. Humanity now designs vehicles capable of leaving this atmosphere intentionally. Rockets rise not as accidents of exploration, but as calculated departures. Space stations orbit as continuous habitats. Probes travel toward distant planets, carrying fragments of human curiosity beyond lunar reach. For the first time in 4 billion years, life on Earth contemplates leaving Earth. The arc feels improbable, from fragile primates moving cautiously through African grasslands to engineers plotting interplanetary trajectories. The shift defies intuition. Evolution shaped organisms to adapt within ecosystems. Now, one species seeks to create ecosystems beyond its origin. Artificial intelligence expands cognitive capacity. Synthetic biology experiments with constructing new forms of life or altering existing ones. Space agencies and private ventures outline missions to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. The boundary between science fiction and engineering narrows steadily. This is the chapter's most profound turn. If expansion once meant crossing oceans, it may soon mean crossing vacuum. The concept reframes everything that came before. The Ice Ages, the first villages, the rise of cities, all unfolded within a single planetary cradle. Now that cradle is no longer the only potential stage. Yet departure introduces unfamiliar questions. What values accompany settlers to another world? Do we transport the same patterns of competition and extraction? Or do we redesign social systems before stepping outward? If humanity modifies its own biology to survive new environments, where does identity remain anchored? The tone slows deliberately. The spectacle of rockets gives way to reflection. Expansion beyond Earth does not erase vulnerability. It multiplies responsibility. Closed habitats require balance more delicate than any terrestrial system. Mistakes cannot be offset by migration to another valley. If humanity leaves Earth, Will it carry its ancient patterns, or transcend them? The line between evolution and intention fades further. Natural selection shaped bodies suited for gravity and oxygen, rich air. Engineering may reshape those bodies for radiation exposure or reduced gravity. The future becomes less about passive adaptation and more about deliberate design. The horizon widens beyond geography into philosophy. What does survival mean when habitat can be manufactured? What does heritage mean when birthplace becomes one of many? Having explored possibilities of renewal, repetition, and expansion beyond planetary boundaries, the narrative prepares to return to its origin point. It must look once more at Earth without humans and consider what presence has meant and what absence would mean. The story closes where it began. Wind moves through forests, unbroken by roads. Grass bends across plains that carry no visible trace of cities. Oceans roll beneath wide, indifferent sky. There are no engines, no signals, no satellites blinking overhead. The planet turns as it did, long before language first emerged to describe it. Imagine a distant horizon of time. Skyscrapers, once symbols of permanence, begin to surrender to weather. Glass fractures under repeated freeze and thaw. Steel beams weaken as oxidation creeps silently along their length. Concrete cracks, floors collapse inward. Rain seeps into foundations. Moss takes root in window frames. Vines climb over empty facades, reclaiming shape with patient insistence. Abandoned streets fill with soil carried by wind and flood. Seeds settle into asphalt fissures. Within decades, small trees rise where traffic once flowed. Within centuries, forests blur the outline of neighborhoods. The geometry of cities softens into irregular green. Metals corrode, plastics persist longer, fragmenting slowly into particles embedded in sediment. Future geological layers preserve thin bands of synthetic residue, mute signatures of industrial presence. Over millennia, shifting tectonic plates rearrange coastlines. Mountains lift and erode. Oceans advance and retreat. Surface traces fade. The planet does not pause to mourn. It continues, cycling through glacial phases and warmer interludes. Storm systems gather and disperse. Species rise, adapt, and disappear. Life reconfigures itself according to conditions present, not memories held. Earth endured asteroid impacts powerful enough to darken skies for years. It survived volcanic eruptions that reshaped continents. Ice sheets advanced kilometers deep and withdrew again. Human presence, though intense and transformative in its moment, occupies a thin geological layer compared to what came before. This recognition is not nihilistic. It is humbling. The narrative that felt monumental from within cities constructed, empires expanded, networks woven across continents, shrinks when viewed against deep time. Humanity's arc spans thousands of years. The planet's history stretches across billions. The contrast invites perspective rather than despair. If Earth no longer remembers us, what will truly remain? Perhaps faint chemical signatures in stone, perhaps altered evolutionary pathways influenced by our interventions. Perhaps nothing recognizable at all. Over immense stretches, tectonics grind evidence into metamorphic silence. The forests do not require witnesses to exist. Oceans do not depend on observation to rise and fall. The sky does not alter its color for memory's sake. And yet, for a brief interval, the planet carried a species capable of reflecting upon it. A species that named mountains, charted stars, and questioned its own trajectory. That awareness may be the most unusual layer of all, with the possibility of disappearance acknowledged. Not as prophecy, but as perspective. If permanence is not guaranteed, then meaning must be reconsidered. The question lingers as the final images gather echoes from across the journey. A handprint pressed against cavestone. Smoke rising from early villages at dawn. Towers of glass reflecting sunlight. A blue planet suspended in darkness. The thread connecting them is not obvious at first glance. What did it mean to become fully human? Was it language? The weaving of sounds into shared meaning. Cooperation. The ability to bind strangers into a common purpose. Imagination. powerful enough to carve myth into stone and story into sky. Technology, the tool that multiplied effort until it reshaped continents. Or responsibility, the recognition of consequence beyond immediate need. Each answer feels sufficient for a moment, then incomplete. Language allowed memory to travel beyond lifetimes. Cooperation scaled survival from small bands to vast civilizations. Imagination carried us through fear into design. Technology amplified our reach. Responsibility emerged slowly as awareness deepened, yet none alone defines the whole. The common thread appears elsewhere. At some point, humans began not only surviving the world, but questioning it, not only adapting to environment, but reflecting upon adaptation itself. A hunter who once tracked prey eventually stood beneath the stars and asked what lay beyond them. A farmer who once planted grain eventually wondered about the nature of growth. A ruler who once commanded armies questioned legacy. Awareness widened. The twist rests gently within this realization. Becoming fully human may not have been a completed event in prehistory. It may be an unfolding process. The first spark of imagination marked one threshold. The rise of cities marked another. The recognition of planetary impact may signal yet another. Maturity evolves. Each era redefines what responsibility means. Early cooperation ensured survival. Later systems demanded governance. Today, awareness stretches globally. To be fully human may not mean achieving dominance over environment, but understanding our place within it. What if being fully human is not about power, but about awareness? Power alone built empires that later fell. Awareness can prevent repetition. Power extracted resources. Awareness measures consequence. Power constructed networks. Awareness questions their resilience. The capacity for self-questioning distinguishes this species more profoundly than architecture or machinery. Humans ask why they exist, not merely how to continue. They consider futures that may never unfold. They debate ethics of actions before consequences arrive. The tone grows quieter here, reflective rather than declarative. Humanity's defining trait may be the ability to step back from its own momentum and examine it. From cave walls to satellites, the arc traces increasing self-understanding. Imperfect, uneven, contested, but expanding with awareness at the center. The inquiry extends beyond history alone. It turns toward meaning. Not what was built or what may fall, but what consciousness itself signifies within the vastness of Earth's timeline. The final question opens outward, beyond survival, beyond power, toward purpose. The camera rises once more, slowly, almost imperceptibly. Continents stretch beneath drifting clouds. Forests ripple in deep green waves. Deserts glow in soft gold. Oceans move in broad, patient rhythms, their surfaces reflecting light that has traveled millions of miles before touching water. From this height, borders dissolve. Cities become faint textures. Roads fade into threads too thin to trace. Time compresses. Ice once pressed across these lands and withdrew. Mountains rose and eroded. Rivers shifted course. Entire species flourished and vanished without ceremony. The world before modern humans was not empty. It was active, dynamic, indifferent. Life adapted without witness. Ecosystems reorganized without memory. Humanity entered this continuum late. Emergence, adaptation, expansion, contraction. These cycles preceded us. They will outlast us. The arc traced across this documentary, from fragile primates to planetary influence, fits within larger rhythms that have shaped Earth for billions of years. What felt singular from within appears continuous from above. The final reveal does not announce itself loudly. It settles gently into place. Humanity is neither accident nor destiny. It is continuity, a temporary configuration of matter that developed the capacity to observe itself, carbon arranged into consciousness, minerals reshaped into thought, the same elements forged in ancient stars now capable of reflection. This awareness does not separate us from the planet, it binds us more intimately to it. The forest that grows without witness and the mind that contemplates it arise from shared origin. The ocean's tides and human curiosity follow different expressions of the same physical laws. In the vast timeline of Earth, what does one aware species truly mean? Perhaps it means the universe briefly noticing itself through biological form. Perhaps it means nothing beyond transient complexity. Or perhaps meaning exists not in permanence, but in participation from orbit. The distinction between before and after softens. The planet turned without us. It will turn beyond us. Yet for a brief interval, it hosts a species capable of tracing its own lineage back to stardust and forward toward possibility. The tone rests in stillness, rather than conclusion. There is no final declaration here, no promise of endless ascent or inevitable decline, only perspective. The silent planet of the opening scene now includes voices capable of contemplating silence itself. Emergence leads to awareness. Awareness invites responsibility. Responsibility shapes choice. And choice influences which patterns continue and which evolve. The camera ascends higher still until Earth becomes a small sphere against immense blackness. The question lingers, unforced, unclosed. The narrative dissolves into open sky, not as an ending, but as an invitation to carry the inquiry beyond the screen, beyond this moment, into whatever chapters unfold next.